Hi everyone, Ryan here from Fight Game Analysis, and today we're going to be talking about the upcoming fight between Liam Smith and Jessie Vargas. But before we jump into that, if you've been enjoying the content, please go ahead and click on the like button and also subscribe to the channel. Really appreciate your support. Alright, so we've got a fight coming up here on the undercard of Katie Taylor and Amanda Serrano. We've got Liam Smith and Jessie Vargas. Now, both of these guys are interesting fighters. Look, what I'm about to say is not a knock on either man. I do not mean this in any whatsoever disrespectful. But both men at this point are kind of gatekeepers. Both men are kind of starting to enter that journeyman role, even though they're not advanced at age and they're not really old. Neither one of these guys is like their upper 30s. But I say that just based off of what we've seen from them, the level of competition out there, guys who are currently at the top of that division. Like, let me ask you, do you think either one of these guys are going to beat Charlo? Right, that's the easiest way to think about it. Let's not talk about all the potential belts that are available, whether or not one of these men can achieve the status of world champion. Let's just think about one man being the best at a weight class. This contest between these two is being contested at 154 pounds. Can either of these men beat Charlo? Because that's probably who you give the top to at 154 for the time being. I doubt it. Right? I doubt it. Now, Charlo does have to get past this fight with Castaño. That's another story. But my point being, I don't think either one of these guys at any point in their career, what's left of it, are going to end up being the best of the best of the best at 154 pounds. Now, let's talk about them a little bit, though, right? Because they are fighting on Saturday night. Liam Smith, very technically sound. Very technically sound fighter. That's the first thing that jumps out at me when I sit down and I start to watch this film, break down the tape. It doesn't surprise me, though. He's got three brothers. All three of them are pros. Most famous one probably being Callum Smith. So you know that's just a man who spent a lot of time in the gym thinking about fighting, talking about fighting, practicing different things, going through little drills all over the place. And it shows. Because every single fight that you see him in, he is a technically sound fighter. Works well behind the jab. Goes to the body with it. Goes upstairs with it. Great left hook. Knows how to lead with that left hook. Knows how to counter with it. Same thing. Goes downstairs. Goes upstairs. Look at his last fight with Fowler. Right, one of the things that I loved about that fight was the way he took away Fowler's jab. Everybody was talking into that fight, going into that fight about how Fowler needed to fight at distance. He needed to use that jab. He needed to get it out there. Liam Smith, don't get me wrong, he got caught with that jab a few times during the fight too. Right, Fowler was able to get it off at times, but he was also able to take that jab away at times. And he did it through footwork to control the distance. He did it through upper body and head movement to get off the center line. And when he did, he would step in, he would dip off to the side, and he would fire off that left hook. And he saw a lot of success with it. Again, Fowler saw a lot of success too. He was hitting with the jab. He was going some good combinations. He was cutting some angles. But Smith persevered, man, and he figured out a way to come out there and come out with the victory. Show that he wasn't a guy that people were going to just be able to put on his resume easily. And he's only got 3 losses. Canelo, Jaime Munguia, and Magomed Kurbanov. And let me tell you, that Kurbanov, that wasn't his last fight. Fowler was his last fight. It was the one before that. He doesn't have a big name. Nobody's out there really talking about him all that much. We don't have these highlight reel knockouts or finishes or wins for him. But that dude can fight. He knows how to fight really well. Go back and watch that film. You got a guy like Smith, who himself is a very well-schooled fighter, a veteran of the game. And he wasn't able to get off pretty much at all. Kurbanov was able to kind of use that Philly shell defense. He was able to use that front shoulder to block a lot of stuff. He was able to get underneath a lot of those shots. Just overall a very well-schooled fighter that went out there. But those are the only 3 losses that he has. Now, standing across from him, we've got Jessie Vargas. I've always been a fan of Jessie Vargas, but if I'm calling it like I see it, he's a part-time fighter at this point in his career. He's only got 6 fights over the last 6 years. Last fight was about 2.5 years ago. Like, think about that for a minute. That's a part-time fighter. Now, did he look really good in that last fight? Yeah, up until he got dropped in the 5th round. He was fighting Mikey Garcia. He looked really good. He was getting off well with that jab. He was getting off with the right hand. He was stifling a lot of what Mikey Garcia was doing. When Mikey was trying to come in with the jab, Jessie Vargas was able to use that left hook beautifully. He was able to use it to great effect. Countering with it, leading with it, hiding it behind the jab and coming around the guard with it. All great. Then he got caught in the 5th round by Mikey Garcia doing what Mikey Garcia does, which is throwing a straight 1-2 down the pipe. Hurt him. Kind of was never the same for the rest of the fight. Right? And that's kind of what we've seen in a way from Jessie Vargas throughout his career. Not always that he gets caught with the 1-2 and dropped or anything like that, but in the way that he's never able to beat the guys at the very top of the division. Now, Mikey Garcia was never the man at 147 pounds, but he was always considered highly skilled. Did his best work at 130, 135 before he moved up. He just doesn't have the frame for 147 pounds. He's not going to be able to go out there and compete with the likes of an Errol Spence or Terrence Crawford or somebody like that. Just not going to be able to happen. But still highly skilled. And that's what we saw from Jessie Vargas. Never able to step up and make that leap and get over those fights against the highly skilled opponents. Right? The most highly skilled guy that he got, we'll call it not a loss from, was his fight with Broner. He got a draw. But when he stepped up against Timothy Bradley, when he stepped up against Manny Pacquiao, when he stepped up against Mikey Garcia, these are the guys he's getting the losses against. So to beat him, you have to be somebody who's really at the very top. You have to be somebody who's very skilled, which is why earlier I referred to him as a gatekeeper. He's that guy who's right at that cusp. If you don't have the absolute top level skills, you're not going to be able to get past a Jessie Vargas. However, he's not in his prime anymore. Like I just mentioned, he's a part-time fighter. You can't be a part-time fighter and be at the very top. It doesn't work that way. When you're a part-time fighter, you got one foot in, you got one foot out. That's exactly what it ends up looking like. You got one foot in and one foot out. And maybe that looks like your skills deteriorate a little bit. Or maybe that looks like you're great in the first half of the fight, but not the second. Or maybe it looks like your cardio fails, or you lose some concentration, or you're not quite as crisp as you used to be with things. Whatever it is, when you're a part-time fighter, even if you're only 30 years old, 32 years old, at a time when you should be performing at your absolute peak, that won't be the story anymore. And in my opinion, that's one of the things that we're looking at with Jessie Vargas, part-time fighter. The next thing that we're looking at with this fight that's a knock on him, this is going to be the heaviest he's ever fought. Now, you could look at me and you could say, Ryan, 2 fights ago, he fought Humberto Soto. That was at junior middleweight. Okay, that's true. They didn't weigh in at 154. They weighed in at like 150 and a half, 151, whatever it was, right? It was a catch weight, I believe. But yes, that fight was technically a junior middleweight fight. But again, it was a man who was a much smaller man. Humberto Soto was not a natural 154. Humberto Soto was older in that fight, and he did his best work at much lighter weight classes like 126, 130, 135, something like that. Not a natural 154. And everybody else that you saw Jessie Vargas fight throughout the remainder of his career was at 147 or 140. And he fought a lot of the guys at 147 who had moved up in weight. They were not natural 147 guys. Be that a Timothy Bradley, be that Manny Pacquiao, whatever it may be, that's not who he was going in there and competing against. Now he's stepping up to 154 against a guy who's never fought under 154 pounds in Liam Smith. He's a much naturally bigger man. Even though he won't be taller, even though he doesn't have the reach advantage, he's the much naturally bigger man. And Liam Smith has also fought against much naturally bigger men. Like, dude, Canelo and Jaime Munguia? Like, those guys are way bigger than anybody that Jessie Vargas has ever stepped in against. I think that's going to make a difference in this fight. I think what we're going to see with that size difference, it's going to translate 2 ways. Number one, Jessie Vargas is not going to be able to hurt Liam Smith. He's not going to be able to punch hard enough to get his respect. He's not a big puncher anyways, and now he's moving up in weight. Number two, I think we're going to see it in his punch resistance. Liam Smith isn't exactly a big puncher. He's got like 30 wins with 17 knockouts. Not great, but he can crack a little bit. But now he's fighting a guy who's smaller, moving up in weight. I think his punch is going to have some extra pop to it because of that. So I think those are 2 ways that's going to play out. I think that Liam Smith has fought the better competition at this weight. Right? We've only got 1 fight for Jessie Vargas at this weight at 154 pounds against an old Soto. I think Liam Smith he's got the advantage with the experience level at this weight. Now, Jessie Vargas has a really crisp jab. Likes to throw long punches. Likes to get that right hand working behind it. He'll let his hands go in spots. He'll fight in spots and he'll work some good combinations. But ultimately, he likes to work more behind that jab. He's used to being the taller and longer guy. Technically, he'll be taller and longer in this fight, but only by like an inch. I think he's not going to be able to get that jab off. I think what he's going to find is that Liam Smith has an answer for that jab. As I mentioned, we saw that in his last fight with Fowler. He's able to control the distance with his feet. He's able to get his head off the center line with his head and upper body movement. I think he's going to be able to nullify that jab for parts of the fight against Vargas. Vargas is still going to get it off. It's crisp. He's got the faster hands than Smith, so he's going to be able to land some shots. Liam Smith likes to fight behind that guard. right? Picks a lot of shots off, uses some good defense, but he still gets caught with things. He'll get caught with that left hook while he's coming in at times, I'm sure. But he's going to be able to nullify that jab at times. He's going to be able to work in behind that left hook of his own. He's going to be able to come in and put in some good body work and go to the body. And I think that as we see this fight go on, you'll start to see him break Jessie Vargas down. You'll start to see him become more dominant and winning the rounds more clearly. I wouldn't be surprised if Jessie Vargas wins a few of these early rounds, but once we start to hit the middle and the late, I expect Liam Smith not to get the stoppage or anything. If he does, I guess I'd be a little bit surprised maybe. But again, we've got Jessie Vargas coming off a huge layoff, so we're not exactly sure what we expect him to look like. We saw him get hurt by Mikey Garcia, who's a man who's much smaller than Liam Smith. So I can't say I would necessarily be surprised if he got the stoppage, but it's not what I'm predicting. I expect Liam Smith to come away with a victory in which we say he pretty much controlled the action, right? He could win 8 rounds. And we would say that he pretty much controlled the action for the majority of the fight. Jessie Vargas looked good, particularly a little bit early when his hand speed and his cardio, he was able to shine a little bit. But as it wore down, we see Liam Smith come out with the victory. So that's what I think is going to happen in this one. I think he's like a 2.5 to 1 favorite, Liam Smith is, which is some pretty decent odds, right? It's kind of about where I would put it at. I actually think he's a little bit more. I think that translates to a 71% win ratio advantage or probability. I would put him a little bit higher than that. So there technically is some value in the line. But let me know what you guys think. Is Jessie Vargas going to come out and shine? Is he actually going to be rejuvenated after the time off? And when he comes out here, he's going to show that he belongs at this weight class. He's going to carry that power with him a little bit, and be able to get the respect of Liam Smith and show that the older man that, dude, your time is past. I'm the one who's here now. Is that what it's going to be? Let me know what you guys think.